Yeah, innovation to me is really all about not being comfortable. It's about continuously challenging the status quo. It's about tapping into a restlessness in order to do things differently, to do things better. And there should always be continuous improvement, and a lot of companies talk about continuous improvement. That could be considered innovative at some level, but really innovation comes through some step change actions, some step change of products, some step changes in services. So it's destroying the status quo to really create a new future.
Do you see the way that companies approach innovation changing from pre-COVID-19 to post-COVID-19?
Listen, I think some things are going to be quite obvious, as we move to a world that isn't solely office-based to a world that is partially office-based, partially home-based, partially remote, partially local. I think we find ourselves in probably the right balance we should have been all along. And it's innovation, it's this change, I should say, that has been forced upon us that is making us look at things a bit differently and finding the right balance. At the end of the day, we have to work together, but we also need to be able to innovate apart. And I think it's those changes that are going to be quite different. There's been a work from home, I'll call it threat for years, and how do we have remote workforces? But there's really not been that burning platform, that need to change, and COVID-19 has given us that. But it's also at the same time shown us that we're not as efficient. We're not as effective when we're completely distributed. So how do we use technology to enable us to work remotely, to tap into talent wherever it may be, but at the same time come together? And it's that balance, it's that push and pull, it's that crisis-induced versus companies creating their own mini crises, certainly not at the level of COVID, but their own mini crises in order to create that urgency, that need, that restlessness to do things differently.
One of the core things of this new normal is, remote working. But do you see any other more pervasive changes across what companies need to do post-COVID-19 as well as part of this new normal?
Yeah, a couple things. I think there is a gift in COVID, and it's a very difficult thing to say when so many people are suffering, so many people have died, and the effects of COVID are going to last for a long time. I mean, this is a painful time in human history. With that said, it is an opportunity for us to look at the world through a different lens and to do things differently. Diversity is one thing that I think will actually benefit from the world we're in right now, because we can actually go out and reach out to talent, to the innovators in the most remotest parts of the world, where before they may not have been able or willing to come to the CBD of one city or the next. We now know that we can work remotely with some people quite effectively. So I see the diversity of workforce being a positive outcome on what was really forced upon us.
You mentioned before the word change, and this is obviously a change that has been induced by a pandemic that people have no choice but to participate in. What happens as things go back to normal and people suddenly find themselves in a position where, they have to confront this change as part of the new normal? How does a company adapt and prepare its team for that change?
Yeah, listen, I really don't like the word normal. My career has been built on actually disrupting normal. And what I mean by that is status quo is normal, right? It's the way we do things, the way we've always done things. It is normal. It's the norm. If you turn that upside down and always look to doing something differently, to changing, then you're innovating. And that's really what's important to us here at YBF, is it's about looking at technology, looking at change, looking at crises, looking at opportunity, all as ways to drive value, to do things differently, to turn tech, if you will, from a disruptor into an enabler. And that's what companies need. That's what people need. That's what people want.
In light of COVID-19, a lot of companies are now facing fundamental questions about the sustainability of the current business models. And that goes to the need to innovate. But there is that tension between, do I focus on business as usual right now, or do I focus on innovating within my company? How does that company strike that balance?
Every industry and every company is really different, Jason. And it really comes down to what and who the company is serving, what products and services they are producing and providing, and figuring out when to look internally and when to look externally. It's really seldom black or white, and it's seldom either one or two. It's typically both. I think of strategy and operations as two sides of the same coin, and you kind of need to spin it. So you need to strategize and operationalize at the same time, and you need to be flexible in both. If you spend a year thinking about a strategy and then 3 years executing, you're probably going to fail.
And you mentioned internal versus external innovation. Could you give us a rundown of what the differences are?
Yeah, again, I think it really does depend on the company. So to me, it's finding the right balance. You should build an internal innovation capability, an internal innovation mindset. And you should reward your team, not only for keeping the lights on, but for innovating. But you should also acknowledge that there are subject matter experts, there are places to go, there are ecosystems and individuals that might not be part of the internal core that need to be accessed. I mean, that's really the power of YBF.
Farley, this morning I was reading the AFR, and in the news, one of the federal ministers had said that innovation is going to be the new vocabulary for the next couple of years because of COVID-19. What responsibility do these large companies have in light of the huge societal and economic disruptions to society? How do they give back to society? How do they interact with society post COVID-19?
I think we all have to figure this out. So whether it be at the micro level of you and I as individuals, figuring out how do we help make the world a better place. I mean, however grandiose that seems, we can make it real and personal by saying, how do we make it safe and secure for our partners, for our children, for our families? That is innovation. There's a role that government needs to play. There's a role big companies need to play, and there's absolutely a role for startups and scale-ups. I think bringing that ecosystem together of people thinking and acting differently, leveraging the diversity of mindset, of thought, of experience, of location, to think about the world differently. So, we're sitting here in the Melbourne CBD today. It's much quieter than normal, obviously, and part of the challenge we have here is, how do we look at public transportation differently in a world where folks need to be socially distanced? How do we, at the same time, not lose the focus and all the benefits of mass transportation and the environment, but at the same time figure out how do we get people coming into work maybe a bit separate? So we certainly don't want to set the clock back and everybody drive in. That doesn't really help in any manner. I don't have a lot of the answers. There's a lot smarter people than me out there, but ultimately we all need to kind of think through this together. So it's going to question a lot of the things that we thought we were doing right. Okay, and I think we have done a lot of things right. Transportation and free tram zones like they have here in Melbourne, but you can't do that in the same manner anymore. So getting through this puzzle, this obstacle course, will actually make us strong on the other side. It's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging, but that's what drives innovation. I think technology will have a role, but technology for technology's sake is not the answer. It starts with leadership, it starts with diversity, it starts with a mindset, it starts really with a culture of being open to change, of doing things differently, and it's really, really important.
Yeah, during COVID, I was looking just in my local community and that people who were losing their jobs and they were trying to do alternate things. And then I had seen in the past, community currencies or local currencies, which is actually probably, my strongest passion now is in applying Ethereum to community currencies. Yeah, like locally, I was looking for applications, and I actually found it was a bit hard to bring that up, because it was, already a difficult time for people, and they were using Facebook marketplaces to achieve what they needed. So they didn't quite need that. And then I started looking for other real projects, and there is like community inclusion currencies that is led by Grassroots Economics, and they're building. They actually have an alternate currency that operates out of I think a village outside of Nairobi, but in Kenya somewhere. And so they are actively doing community currencies, alternate currencies, and they're developing more of the technology there. On the flip side, you've got the token aspect for individuals. So you've got YouTube celebrities who'll do their own crypto token. So I think that's sort of the spectrum. You've got like people having their own currency for themselves, and then people who are creating alternate currencies to activate a community or to enable trade where it's needed. And that for me is just fascinating that there's technologies out there.
Before I studied medicine, I actually did an arts degree. I did an arts and science degree first. And I think one of the things that emerged out of that learning was that it's almost a false dichotomy. We've drawn this distinction between arts, humanities and science, but it's never been a separate thing. It's just, I think, the way academia has transformed has made it appear as if there's this mythical separation between the two, but it's impossible to separate them. And if you think about our, most cherished cultural artifacts, they're most often a combination of arts, humanities, science and technology, because you can't create a positive or a vibrant experience for somebody, and you'd know from your UX work, without actually considering the human factor. And it goes to what you were saying around taking something that already exists, whether it's a digital platform, and going, wow, geez, why aren't people using it because we've built it so beautifully? Unless you can actually find the human aspect and find either the aesthetic that appeals, which sort of draws on that culture of arts and humanities, you're not going to succeed. So I think for me, arts and humanities is actually what allows you to express impossible things. I mean, if you think about, the architecture of someone like Zaha Hadid, who took metal and transformed it into these incredible shapes, but at the heart of that, it's basically arts with lots of science baked in. And that's what I think we're all working with at the moment. So I think it's vitally important. And I sometimes find some frustration with some of the arguments around, why are we including the arts and humanities? This should just really be about STEM and STEM disadvantage. I'm like, well, you're kind of letting yourselves down, because we're all walking that same path. And if you can actually allow us to be a little bit more interdisciplinary, you can benefit so much more than just trying to pigeonhole yourself into, I'm a technologist, I'm a pure technologist, because it won't get you to where you ultimately want to get to, which is more a democratization of what we do and inviting more people in.
I think one of the things where we're going to start to see it on a more everyday basis, and a little bit of this is already here today, but really personalized and targeted advertisements. And I really think that is going to be a very impactful sector. And so what we've started to see a little bit, if we're talking about Netflix, as sort of was mentioned earlier, what Netflix is doing is when you log into your platform, let's say they're recommending a Harry Potter movie for you to watch, what I see as the cover of the movie might be different from what you see as the cover of the movie, because they know I like to watch films that might have a strong feminine character. So they might show me a film cover with Hermione on the front. But if they know that you like to watch movies that have dragons, they're going to show you a Harry Potter film cover that has a dragon on the front instead of a photo of Hermione. And so they're able to, by using that information, they're able to basically target the things that they know we like and make sure that we're going to watch that movie that they want us to watch. And so that's just an example of Netflix, and there's a million other examples. But I think things like that is really what we're going to start to see on a more everyday basis in the next couple of years.
We were forecasting in February that it would be our first multi-million-dollar donation, which was great. We'd sort of, as I said, we'd worked really hard, investing in growth for a couple of years prior, which had reduced our donation. And so we were expecting this year to be the year that all of that sort of paid off. And then once March hit and we started doing, significantly higher sales months than what we'd forecast, we realized that our donation was actually going to be way bigger than what we thought was possible. So I think it was even in the last couple of months, we thought it would be like 3 and then 4. And then when we finally made it, it was 5, and then it ended up being 5.85. And that was we were kind of speechless, because it really showed that not only could our business model really work and continue to scale, and hopefully we'll see that donation get bigger and bigger in the years to come, but I think it was actually a good moment of saying these business models that are about profit, purpose, and planet actually have a lot of legs. And the future of business is going to be making sure that businesses talk about what they're doing from a sustainability angle, but also talk about what they're doing from an ethical angle and where the money's ultimately ending up. And so I think, we're hopefully going to be one of the kind of challenger brands that starts that becoming, a really mainstream phenomenon for these bigger incumbents that probably haven't ever had to talk about what they're doing from a CSR perspective more than burying it in their annual report. And I think in the next 10 years, as businesses like ours get bigger, we're going to see that changing a lot, and we're going to see these campaigns becoming a necessary part of what that business's brand and ultimately their soul looks like in order to continue attracting customers into their business moving forward.
Look, it's not surprising that at some point technology was going to replace, in this case, human spies, right? Technology is cost effective. Technology, I guess, to an extent, is quicker, a bit more effective than human spies, right? And if it goes bad, nobody dies, nobody gets detained. So I don't think it's surprising that we're seeing the increasing use of the use of technology to do espionage, which is what we call cyber espionage. So, I think it's timely that the Prime Minister came out and said, this is a serious threat, and consequently we will be increasing investment in the area. It's something obviously that as a cybersecurity business I welcome, but not just for the good of my business, but I think national security, for the good of the country, for the good of other businesses in Australia, right? Because if all of that were to continue unaddressed, the effects are quite dire.
And on the note of investment, they've mentioned that the Australian government would invest about 1.35 billion into cybersecurity over the next 10 years. That promises to create about 500 jobs. Do you think that's enough to combat the growing threat of cybersecurity and cyber espionage?
Look, I think whether it's enough or not is kind of a secondary point, right? In my opinion, at least, I think doing something, that's what matters. And we're seeing the government do something here, which is, it's welcome, It's not something that you could just sit and hope and wish away, It's something that you need to address head on. And I think what the government has addressed, it's a good step. I definitely welcome that.
I think you're going to see this category emerge. It's called project space, which is exactly what you're saying, and exactly YBF are perfectly positioned for that. You're going to find large companies taking teams, relocating them, spreading out the teams, because that'll de-risk the chance, should there be somebody catch the virus and bring it in, and then you're having to shut the entire office down. That's one of the ideas and behind that strategy. Yeah, this big cluster of people all in the one building, all sort of domiciled at the same place. That just seems to be something that seems to be yesterday's strategy. It seems to be now it's going to be smaller groups, and it's all about more agile. Put them into environments that they're going to be inspired from. I think was a lot of. We're already seeing that. That was a big driver with co-working and flexible space, that we were seeing companies pulling teams out and wanting to put them in a different environment around different people. I think, if there's certain areas of the building that they want a bit more free thinkers, or they want people that might be out there to innovate for the business, they should be in a innovative, or, that type of environment, which is going to stimulate that. I can't see why there can't be any upside for, co-working, flexible work operators. I mean, if anything, we've just seen people will, if there's going to be a drift away from the traditional office, that, that set and forget sort of 3 and 5 year lease, and, having people come in. I just think those times, I just don't think people are confident in A, committing to that length of time, B, you know, I think people want agility and flexibility. And look, flexible, you know, some people say, well, what happens in a pandemic? People, you know, just walk out and hand back their lease. Well, that happens anyway in the traditional. I can tell you there's people that are in a 3-year lease right now that have just handed their keys back and said, hey, we don't need this space anymore. You know, like, find somebody else. It's you know, you know, obviously there's things that has to happen, and there's a bit of a financial repercussion, but, you know, they still see it as being better than being locked in this long-term lease for space that they just can't see themselves using anymore. Can't tell you how many conversations that we're having with people that are trying to look towards an office-less type of working environment, which that means is they don't just have a set, you know, a set head office. They're going to have, they want to use, you know, spaces like YBF to be able to go out and when they need it to have get people together, whether it's large meetings, conferencing, you know, or having sort of some sessions where they might be based on a project, so they've got something coming up and they'll all come together and work together for that period, and then maybe go back to a bit of remote. So I definitely think you guys are well positioned for that, because it's actually going to be the big companies that are going to drive it. I think you're going to find the big corporates are the ones that are really out there looking to do that sort of stuff.